start. But now to the still developing situation in northern Syria, Turkey, and now Iraq. Many U.S. troops that had been stationed in Syria arrived in Iraq today. Local civilians greeted the Americans as they entered the province of Duhok early this morning. President Trump and the Pentagon say those troops will stay in Iraq for now to monitor ISIS and the Turkish ceasefire with the Kurds. And the welcome that the U.S. troops got in Iraq is in stark contrast to what happened as they left Kurdish areas in Syria. Some Kurds threw rotten food and rocks at them in protest of the withdrawal that left the Kurds open for a major offensive from the Turkish army. That offensive is currently under a ceasefire until tomorrow night. Earlier today, President Trump again defended his decision to pull those troops out.
The ceasefire is holding. The Kurds are moving out to safer areas beyond the safe zone, as we call it. Having a safe zone is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And plenty of Turks have been killed because of conflict on their border. So, you have to look at it both ways. But the ceasefire is absolutely holding. There's some skirmishes, but very little, relatively speaking.
All right, let's bring in tonight's opening panel. We're joined in studio by military policy analyst David Sharpe. David is also a U.S. Air Force veteran, and we're also joined by Matt Brodsky. He's a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group. All right, gentlemen, good to have you both with us. David, I'd like to start with you. Can the U.S. troops that have now been moved to Iraq from Syria still secure American interests in Syria? Can they be effective against ISIS regrouping if they're in Iraq?
Absolutely. The president, let's go back historically first, right, Michelle? President Obama said in 2015, when we had troops in Syria, that if President Assad is going to attack anybody in Syria, that he's going to force nuclear strike. That's what President Obama said. President Assad at the time, he shot a biological weapon. 1,400 people were affected, killed for that. President Obama didn't do anything.
Well, that's the red line that Obama drew and failed to meet. But what is the argument? Because many are saying that perhaps President Trump is equal of the same offense, not in terms of drawing a red line, but in terms of potentially creating a power vacuum in Syria, potentially reverting the gains that the U.S. has made by allowing ISIS to regroup now with this U.S. withdrawal.
I don't believe so too much. There's a lot of intelligence coming in. When I was in the U.S. intelligence community and in the military, serving in the Middle East, the military intelligence changes just like it does with the wind blows over there. So when you have Turkey, Indonesia's on alert now, what the president is doing is he's actually calling those countries in the surrounding area for accountability. They need to step up and provide troops. U.S. has been doing this for decades, and a lot of blood has been shed on our end. It's time we join together, become a unified approach.
David, I understand the need to bring U.S. troops back home, but there is a big concern that this has big ramifications, that it sends a dangerous message to America's allies, that they too can be betrayed like the Kurds. At least that's the way the Kurds see it. It also, as we said, creates a power vacuum in Syria, which allows the Russians, the Syrians, the Turks, and Iran to potentially thrive in. And the chaos that is created can allow ISIS to regroup.
I have an opposing opinion of that, and that is this. There's still U.S. nukes in Turkey, and we are still there. Turkey will not come to this, but we are still there. We have special forces on ground.
Okay, so you think there's still enough leverage against Turkey and enough of a deterrent?
Absolutely.
Matt Brodsky, what do you think?
Yeah, I just don't see any of that as a possibility. The fact is we're losing all of our leverage. We already lost all of our leverage. The reason we're in Syria and in that area is not only just to help the Kurds, as we are hearing, but of course it has geopolitical realities in which Russia and Turkey are now going to be cashing in. Turkey and Iran will probably be working together to get out of some of the sanctions environment. It undermines a lot of our policies. And the fact is we will no longer have the kind of intelligence assets that are necessary on the ground inside of Syria, and of course we will be the only power in that arena who actually just tossed our proxy overboard when every one of the major powers who was involved there was working through a proxy. So it makes no sense, and I think a little naive to pretend this is anything but incredibly damaging to America's interest now and probably for quite a foreseeable future.
David, do you think that the Turks would have launched this offensive if the U.S. troops were still stationed there? Because the argument is made that essentially the Americans were getting a big bang for their buck, having a limited number of troops in Syria, the mere presence of which deterred the Turks from launching this offensive against the Kurds, that pulling the troops out of Syria, in fact, greenlit this Turkish move.
I think the Turkish president was going to do this no matter what. He's looking to get on the radar, just like the North Koreans, just like Iran.
No matter what, that he would have launched an offensive into northern Syria while U.S. troops were still there?
Absolutely.
That he would have risked injuring, hurting, killing fellow NATO members, U.S. troops, if they didn't pull out?
I believe so, absolutely. He likes to take things on his own. He's a new level. You talked about what he wants. He wants nuclear bombs, right? Russia's more likely going to help in and step in and do that. However, U.S. isn't playing around anymore. We still have a lot of special forces on the ground, undercover. We got the agency over there. There's a lot of these things that are going on. We're not going to lose ground there at all. And if we do, we can snap the fingers and bring 1,000, 1,800 troops immediately there in northern Iraq.
Matt, what do you expect to happen now that the ceasefire expires come tomorrow?
Well, it's clearly going to be in Turkey and Putin's hands, because that's magically when they happen to be having a big meeting. So they'll be deciding what they want to do with it. The United States has no leverage and will not be involved there. So I imagine Turkey will probably try to keep pressing forward with its security zone, trying to increase that size. And we'll see if there'll be Russia somewhere along the borders as well. Either way, when you give up your ground, you don't have leverage and you don't get a say in things. It's really a dangerous thing to do. If we keep on repeating this over the globe, our allies will abandon us. That won't, it doesn't work out well for us.
All right, Matt, thank you for your perspective. Matt Brodsky, David Sharpe, good to have you both. Now to a big development.